Welcome to 3.1. Today we're going to talk the distributive property. Learning objective for today, use the distributive property to evaluate and simplify numerical and algebraic expressions. What if you had an expression that involved addition or subtraction, like 2x squared minus 4, and you wanted to multiply it by a number like a half? How would you go about it? After completing this concept, you'll be able to use the distributive property to evaluate problems like this. So the distributive property. You take the term outside of the parentheses and you multiply it by all of the terms inside of the parentheses. So if we had something like this, I can distribute the a inside the parentheses. So I'd have a times b and I'd have a times c. And so with other numbers and such moved in there, okay, distribute the 2, I'd have 2 times x and 2 times 3, which I could simplify down as well. At the end of the school year, an elementary teacher makes a little gift bag for each of his students. Each bag contains 1 class photo, 2 party favors, and 5 pieces of candy. The teacher will distribute the bags among his 28 students. So how many of each item does the teacher need? Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to figure out how much for 1. So it's 1 photo and 2 party favors and 5 pieces of candy. And that's going to happen for 28 students. So I'm going to multiply everything by 28. So if I distribute the 28 to all of these, 28 times 1 photo gives me 28 photos. 28 times 2 party favors gives me 56 party favors. 28 times 5 gets me 140 pieces of candy. So now we're going to determine the value of 11 times 2 minus 6 using both order of operations and the distributive property. So order of operations, again, is PEMDAS. Okay. Parentheses are first. So inside the parentheses, I do 2 minus 6. If I type that into my calculator, I get a negative 4. There are no exponents, so then I can go right to multiplying 11 times negative 4 would give me a negative 44. Now I'm going to do the same thing using the distributive property. So now I'm going to distribute the 11 inside the parentheses. So I'm going to do 11 times 2, and I'm going to subtract from that 11 times 6. 11 times 2 is 22. 11 times 6 is 66. If I type this into my calculator and subtract it, I would get a negative 44. So either way, I get the same answer. A couple more examples here using the distributive property. So this first one, 11 times 2x plus 6, I'm going to distribute the 11. So I'm going to have 11 times 2x plus 11 times 6. 11 times 2 is 22, so I've got 22x. 11 times 6 is 66. 22x plus 66. A little bit more complicated problem here. I'm going to distribute the 2x over 7. So I've got 2x over 7 times 3y squared. And I've got 2x over 7 times 11 over xy. Okay. When you multiply a fraction by a whole term, you only multiply the top. So I'm going to take 3 times 2 and get 6. Xy squared over 7. And here, multiply it straight across. 11 times 2x is 22x. 7 times xy is 7xy. In here, the second one, you'll notice I have an x on both the top and the bottom. So those are actually going to cancel each other out. And so what I'm left with looks like this. 6xy squared over 7 minus 22 over 7y. Identifying expressions that involve the distributive property. So the distributive property can also appear in expressions that don't include parentheses. So in lesson 1-2, we saw how the fraction bar also acts as a grouping symbol. Now we'll see how to use the distributive property with fractions. So now we're going to see how this works. So if I have 2x plus 8 divided by 4, I can actually write that as 1 over 4 times 2x plus 8. Okay, so I can pull that denominator out to the side and put a 1 on top. Okay, and now I can distribute. So I've got 1/4 times 2x plus 1/4 times 8. 1/4 times 2x, that gives me 1/2 x. 1/4 times 8 gives me 2. Same thing in the second example, I can pull that 3 out and turn it into a 1/3 times 9y minus 2, and I can distribute. So I've got 1/3 times 9y minus 1/3 times 2. Okay. Multiplying this out again, you multiply it by the top, so you'd get 9y over 3 minus 2/3. The 9 and the 3, they cancel each other out. 9 divided by 3 is 3, so I'd get 3y minus 2/3 would be my final answer. We can also solve real-world problems using the distributive property. The distributive property is one of the most common mathematical properties used in everyday life. Anytime we have 2 or more groups of objects, the distributive property can help us solve for an unknown value. So each student on a field trip into a forest is given an emergency survival kit. The kit is to contain 1 flashlight, 1 first aid kit, and emergency food rations. Flashlights cost $12. First aid kits are $7, and food rations are $2 per day. Now this per day is going to help us out here when we find our equation. There's $500 available for the kits and 17 students to provide for. How many days worth of rations can be provided with each kit? So first we come up with our equation. So there's 1 flashlight, 1 first aid kit, and then there's the food. So a flashlight costs $12 each, a first aid kit is $7 each, and food is $2 per day. So we're going to say that x is the number of days, because we don't know, because that's what we're trying to solve for, how many days. So that's going to tell us there. And we're going to take this, and there are 17 students, so we're going to multiply the whole thing by 17. So we are going to distribute. So I'm going to multiply everything in here by 17. 17 times 12, if I type that into my calculator, I get 204. 17 times 7, 119. 17 times 2x gives me 34x. Now I can add these two numbers together and get 323. And what I'm going to do now is I have $500 to work with, so I'm going to set that equal to 500, and I'm going to solve for x. So I subtract 323 over to the other side. I get 34x is equal to 177. Divide both sides by 34, and I get that x is about 5.206. Okay, so it's a decimal, it's rounded. So I can't quite get 6 days, however I can get 5 days worth of food from that $500. So just some review. Keep in mind that using the distributive property means that any and all numbers within the parentheses must be multiplied by the integer on the outside. You must still use the order of operations for all calculations when using the distributive property. So remember, the distributive property of multiplication is the property that states that multiplying a sum by a number is the same as multiplying each number by the outside number and then adding their product. So a times the sum of b plus c, you do a times b plus a times c. And in the order of operations, that's the way of evaluating expressions with certain operations being completed first. And again, that is PEMDAS. Parentheses, exponents, multiply, divide, add, and subtract.